marital exchanges. And this is marriage is accompanied by a transfer of goods or services. Now we have this kind of lingered on in like the form of a dowry in North American weddings, or gifts were given to the couple. In America, it's rare for the in-laws to exchange gifts, like the father and mother of the bride and groom. It's more focused on the individual culture, but in societies where it's kin groups marrying, it's not just the bride and groom that are exchanging gifts or getting gifts from the guests, but whole families or communities are exchanging, and it's building these bonds of relationships. Bride's wealth is this idea that goods are given for the bride. This could be houses, cows, money, etc. You're not necessarily buying the bride, but these goods go usually to the father or brother of the bride, whereas in European and North American sort of dowry ideas, the father would give part of his inheritance to his daughter on her marriage, and it was meant to be like an economic protection for her, because the husband could use it to start a business or a practice, but if he ever left her or shamed her or cheated on her, she could, upon the dissolution of that marriage, the dowry would come back to her. So it was kind of like a way to keep her man behaving and in line. And if something happened, like if he died or ran off, she would have this to fall back on to live on, so she wouldn't be a destitute widow. With the bride's wealth, you're actually exchanging goods or services. Bride service, oh, let me talk a little bit more about bride's wealth. So I'm going to show you a video later where I'm not sure if it's the Ubangi or a cousin tribe, but it's in Africa where the women actually wear lip plates. And depending on how big your lip plate is, you're worth a different amount of cattle. And so you could range anywhere from a 5-cow woman to a 30-cow woman, depending on the size of your lip plate. So if you loved your father or your brothers and you wanted to set them up well in retirement, as a young woman, you would probably stretch out your lower lip as far as you possibly could, because the bigger your lip plate, the bigger your father or brother's payoff for your marriage. Now, if it turns out you're like a few years into the marriage and you're not able to bear children, your husband could come to your father and say, look, I thought I was getting a 30-cow woman, but she hasn't borne me one son, so I don't even know if she's a 5-cow woman, and I want 25 cows back. But if you started producing multiple sons, and maybe you've only been married 5 years and you've already given your husband 6 sons, your father could come to your husband and say, hey, 30 cows was not even close to the worth of my daughter, and I want 60 cows. She's already given you 6 sons. I think 10 cows a son is a reasonable addition to the price. And so it's not just a fixed rate, it varies depending on attributes, childbearing, how submissive or feisty you are. All of those could affect the bride price. Now, bride service is where a groom must work for his bride. And we saw this in the Bible with Jacob, and where he worked 7 years for Rachel, got tricked on his wedding night, had to work another 7 years for Leah, and then you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he worked another 6 years for his flocks of sheep and goats, was his payment after working another 6 years. So he worked like a total of 20 years for his father-in-law Laban, but he got multiple wives out of it and starter flocks of sheep and goats. Dowry, we talked about that. A bride brings a part of her inheritance into the marriage. Oh, this is important, and at least when I wrote these notes, this was true. You might want to make sure the laws haven't changed. This was probably 10 years ago. In the United States, inheritance remains with the receiver. So even if you're married and Your Aunt Madge dies and leaves you her bone china collection. If you end up getting divorced from your husband, he does not have rights to half of your bone china because that was a direct inheritance coming from a dead relative. It's not like your joint income through your job or profession. Things that you inherit are supposed to go to that person themselves.